Good. Let's give people another minute before we begin. Toba, I wasn't sure whether that was a virtual background or a real screen. Now I know it's a real screen.
It's an actual screen, yes. I never did the virtual thing. This way I don't disappear when I sit back.
Okay. All right. We're going to begin even while people keep filtering in. Betty says there's a big thunderstorm here in Fishkill. May have to leave. Well, we have access to this on the website. Toba, do you want this to be recorded?
It's fine with me if you like to record it, sure.
Karen,
the recording's on, so I'm assuming you'll have it.
But it's said by the host or by a participant. Karen, are you recording this?
It is, yes, it's on. It's being recorded.
Yeah, the recording is on.
Okay, good. Yes, Betty. We'll make it available. Okay, hi everyone. This is cool because we have people who are connected to the Woodstock Jewish Congregation and people who are connected to Congregation Dorshei Tzedek in Newton, which is where Rabbi Toba has been the rabbi for a long time. She and I have actually a lot in common because we both landed in our congregations when they were very young and small and never left. And that's cool. Rabbi Toba's built a really, really vibrant, engaging, intellectually engaged, politically engaged, spiritually engaged congregation in Newton. Let me read from her book, just so I get all the facts right, and then I'm going to say something more personal in introducing Toba. Toba is a popular teacher of courses on Judaism and economic justice, Reconstructionist Judaism, new approaches to thinking about God, and the practice of integrating Jewish spiritual and ethical teachings into daily life. Rabbi Spitzer served as the president of the Reconstructionist Rabbinical Association. That's my association. We both went to the same rabbinical school from 2007 through 2009. And Toba was the first LGBTQ rabbi to head a national rabbinic organization. She has received the honor of being included in Newsweek's top 50 rabbis in America list and the 2010 forward list of 50 female rabbis who are making a difference. And I just want to say that whenever Toba speaks or writes, I listen. And I feel like we are very congruent in our approaches to Judaism, to spirituality, to congregational leadership. And when Rabbi Toba writes something in our professional listserv or in her book, which I devoured in the last couple of days, she speaks right to my being and to my intellect and to my soul. So it's fun to have both congregations joining together for a gathering. So I'm going to let Toba take over. She's going to speak with us for a while, talk about the themes in her book, maybe read some passages, and then we'll converse a little, and then there'll be plenty of time for your questions and comments as well, okay? So let's proceed. God is here, reimagining the divine.
God is here, right here in the Zoomverse. Thank you, Jonathan. Well, you are also, so just so the Woodstock folks know that your rabbi is so beloved beyond your walls, and also one of my teachers and friends. Oh, hi, Judith. Yes, Techia in Detroit. Yes, it's been nice. I've been able to be in some different recon spaces over the years. So yeah, I thought I would just share, but I know some of you are have been in a reading group studying the book. I thought I would just share a little bit about sort of how I got to the book, the process for it, share a little bit from the book, and then as Rabbi Kliegler said, we'll converse a bit and then open it up for discussion. So And since I'm in a Reconstructionist setting, I'll start with Mordecai Kaplan. I very much appreciated when I was in rabbinical school in the 90s, learning more about Kaplan and his attempts in the really the first half of the 20th century to come up with ways of talking about God or godliness or the divine that wouldn't be off-putting to modern, rational, science-based people. And really following Kaplan for a while, I got into process theology, which I won't go into in too much detail, but the notion that we can think of God not as a being or a large person, but as a process or a power. But I was really trying to figure out this question, like, what's the way to talk about the divine that will be most accessible to most people, especially the folks in my congregation, and I imagine similar to many in Woodstock, who again are highly educated folks who a very highly personalized, problematic male God in the sky just doesn't work. So that's sort of the path I was on. And then, I don't know, over 10 years ago, I would say 2010, 2011, I happened upon a book in a bookstore called I as an Other. And I forget, the subtitle is something like The Secret Life of Metaphor and How It Shapes the Way We See the World. It's a very long title. And basically the book, which came out in the 90s, was came out in the 2000s by James Geary, was sort of a popular summary of the field of cognitive linguistics, a field which founded by George Lakoff and Mark Johnson, and there's probably people on this call who know more about this than I do, but and I was familiar with George Lakoff. But the basic argument that they were making and that he was making in this book is that metaphor is not just a literary structure. Metaphor is foundational to how human beings perceive and interact with the world, that we can't access big concepts like love or life or time or thoughts or anything larger than the most basic material things. We can't not only can we not talk about them, we can't even understand them or fully access those experiences without the use of metaphor. But the part of the book that sort of hit me and that sent me on the journey that resulted in this book was Geary in the book uses an analogy of volcanoes to talk about how metaphor functions. So he talks about an active volcano as like an active metaphor. It is an active metaphor, is a metaphor you read in a poem or in a novel, and it's a metaphor. Like her eyes were deep pools of mystery. Like that no one's eyes are actually pools of mystery, so that's a metaphor. And then he talked about dormant metaphors. And a dormant metaphor would be a metaphor that's in the culture that we use, that we don't take literally, but as soon as you say it, I say it and you know what I mean because we inhabit the same linguistic culture. I think the example he gives is, I'm up a creek without a paddle. So that's clearly a metaphor. I'm not anywhere near a creek or holding a paddle, but that it means, I'm stuck somewhere and have no idea what to do or can't get out of the situation. But it was the next category that really got me. So the next category was extinct volcanoes or extinct metaphors. And these are what Lakoff and Johnson call metaphors we live by. And an extinct metaphor is a metaphor that's so embedded in our brains and so embedded in our experience that we have no idea it's a metaphor. And the example he gives is, I see what you mean. So we say that all the time. It has nothing to do with seeing. People who are physically blind say, I see what you mean. And it means I understand, or I agree, or I understand, but it's based on a very early infant experience where if you don't see something, it doesn't exist. And the metaphor is seeing is knowing. Other very basic metaphors are the association of being up, physically up, when we're feeling well, when we're in a good mood. I'm really high on life. I'm feeling up today, and down when we're depressed or sad, because we tend to be lying flat when we're not feeling well. We tend to be erect, when we're feeling better. So there were many examples of these metaphors we live by, these extinct metaphors that live in our brains and not only are visible in our speech or manifest in our speech, but really shape how we see the world and how we experience things. So in that moment, I had an aha, and I was like, God is an extinct metaphor. All the arguments about God, I would say much of the last 2,000 years of theological arguments about God are not an argument about God or the actual divine at all. They are debates about a metaphor, and the metaphor is God as a big person. Even people who say they don't believe in God at all, when they talk about God, that is the metaphor they're in. It's a God that knows, a God that judges, a God that loves, a God that, it gets angry. These are all verbs that we use. They're all related to human behavior. You would never say that about an ocean. You wouldn't say the ocean got angry at me. You just wouldn't. So once I realized this, that when we were arguing about God, we're really talking about a metaphor, I realized the project is not to come up with the way to talk about God. The project is to come up just to add more metaphors. There's nothing inherently wrong with thinking God as a person. I mean, sometimes the metaphor of God as a parent or as a beloved or as a teacher is beautiful. So it's not to get rid of those metaphors. But as Lakoff and Johnson teach, when it comes to complex experiences in our lives, no one metaphor will do. You can never describe or experience love with one metaphor. There's many kinds of love, and you need different metaphors to describe that. Time is a good example. We're very deeply embedded in the metaphor of time is money, or time is a scarce resource. And when we're in that metaphor, we feel like we're wasting time or spending time or budgeting time. And we don't just say that, like we experience that, right? We're sitting in the doctor's office for 3 hours. I am wasting time. But that's not the only way we experience time. We can experience time as a flow. We can think back on our ancestors, and it goes back forever, and it goes with, it goes forward forever. So time is not always a precious resource. Sometimes it's an expansive flow, depending on how we're experiencing time, or depending on what we're trying to get at. So I realized that when it comes to the divine, experiences of the sacred are a fundamental human experience. We have evidence of it in every culture, in every part of the world, and since before recorded history. I claim it's a foundational human experience of something in the universe, but the only way to access it is through metaphors. So I decided to write this book. And if you've read the book, the first 2 chapters sort of lay out what I've just said in a little more detail, but the rest of the book is really the important part. The rest of the book, each chapter is a different metaphor. And their metaphors, when I turned to our Jewish sources, mostly Hebrew Bible, Tanakh, not entirely, I realized our ancestors had this beautiful palette of metaphors. Sometimes they related to God as a big person, but sometimes they related to God as an eagle or water or rock. And I just wanted to take seriously those metaphors. I wanted to stop just treating them as literary, frills, and say that these really were ways that our ancestors experienced the divine. What would happen if we took this seriously? So I started teaching this, and I started giving my congregants, assignments to do with each metaphor, and it really worked. It really transformed people's experience. So I want to screen share one thing to sort of show you how the metaphor process works, and then I want to share a little bit of the book. So let me just share this with you. So this is how metaphor works according to the cognitive linguists. There's what's called the target domain. The target domain is the experience or the aspect of reality that we are needing to access through metaphor, or that we can only access through metaphor. And I just gave 3 examples here: anger, ideas, and time. Anger and ideas are obviously sort of limited to the human realm, but time exists, in the universe, but is also a human experience. The source domain is a physical aspect of our experience. The source domain is always physical. It's always embodied. And the target domain usually has multiple source domains to get at it. I love starting with anger because these are so weird and you would never think of it. So the metaphors show up in our language. So these are 2 metaphors for anger. Anger is a hot liquid in a container, and anger is a horse, which is very weird. Then you're like, anger's not a horse, that's stupid. But then I show you some examples. So anger is a hot liquid in a container. They are boiling mad. She blew her top. I need to blow off some steam. So the association of anger with heat is common across cultures, and this particular one is hot liquid. Anger is a horse, unbridled anger. He couldn't rein in his temper. Here are some ways you can harness your anger. So these are different experiences of anger. The first one is like, the buildup of rage, the liquid, we're trying to keep it in. Anger as a horse is like something we can actually ride or try to harness, which is very interesting. So you can see that even the different metaphors for anger take us in different direction. Many different source domains for ideas. Ideas are food, ideas are people, ideas are plants, ideas are cutting instruments, ideas are commodities. A few examples from Lakoff and Johnson. Ideas are food. She devoured the book. Let that idea gel. That theory is half-baked. Ideas are people. He's the father of modern biology. Those ideas died off long ago. Cognitive psychology is in its infancy. And finally, ideas are commodities. This is obviously in human history, relatively new metaphor. It's important how you package your ideas. That's a worthless idea. She's a source of valuable ideas. Again, these are metaphors we live by. These are not, we do not try to articulate metaphors. When we say these things, we say them all the time. And again, and they're different and they highlight a different aspect of the experience. And then I already talked about time as a limited resource. So that's how metaphor works. But the reason I want to share this is that the embodied part is really important because unfortunately, I think one of the tendencies is to, it really started with Maimonides, before Maimonides in the 11th century, 12th century, to get more and more abstract about God, to say like the closer we get to embodied experience around God, like that's somehow primitive and we have to get more and more abstract. And in mystical Judaism is incredibly abstract. Rational Judaism is incredibly abstract. The problem is a really abstract God isn't worth much of anything. It's really hard to pray to an abstraction. It's really hard to, have a profound, it's hard to have a full religious life, I think, in relation to a complete abstraction. What the metaphors do is not to say God is a rock or God is water or God is anything that chapters in my book, but to say these are metaphors our ancestors used to access the divine. And by being grounded in the earth and grounded in our bodies, it gives us access to experiences in a really powerful way. Whatever God itself is, I for certain would never even try to define, but through metaphor, I can access it. So I'm gonna leave that there. And then just read a little bit from the introduction, and then I'm gonna share a couple of the metaphors. So this is from the second chapter, the God metaphor. Many years ago, I worked at an ice cream store in Cambridge, Massachusetts. On any given day, we had over 20 flavors of ice cream available, and we were always experimenting with new ones. One day, a father and his young son came into the store. The little boy, not yet able to read, asked his dad, "What flavors are there?" The father looked up at our wonderful list of flavors of the day and answered, "There's chocolate, vanilla, and strawberry." While I sympathized with the dad trying to not overwhelm his child with too many choices, I felt so sad for that little boy. Here was a diverse world of marvelous ice cream flavors hidden from him only because he couldn't read. It's how I feel about most people's experience of God metaphors. If our only flavor choices are God is a distant ruler or God is an all-powerful and perfect being that we can't really understand, I'd probably walk out of the store. But the happy reality is that our religious traditions offer the equivalent of Baskin-Robbins' 31 flavors when it comes to metaphors for God. And nothing is stopping us from discovering new metaphors that are relevant, powerful, and meaningful to our lives today. This next point is really important. The important thing to remember is that metaphors don't define what something is. A metaphor gives us access to an experience, a way to think about it, talk about it, and act on it. To comprehend complex things like love or time or ideas, we need multiple metaphors, because any given metaphor will highlight one aspect of a concept and hide other aspects. For example, when we experience time through the metaphor of precious resource, we tend to think about how much time we have and how to best use it. We experience it as limited in some way. But when we think of time as movement, we relate to it in terms of distances, how far in the past or in the future an event might be. In this understanding, we experience time as endless in both directions. Neither metaphor is truer than the other or defines what time actually is. Each one simply highlights different aspects of our experience of time. When it comes to God, the metaphors we use are extremely important because those metaphors will shape our experience in profound ways and will affect how we interact with the world around us. As Lakoff and Johnson argue, quote, "New metaphors have the power to create a new reality. In most cases, what is at issue is not the truth or falsity of a metaphor, but the perceptions and inferences that follow from it, and the actions that are sanctioned by it, end quote. If we want our spiritual lives to be wholesome, to promote deeper understanding and right action, then the metaphors we use to think and talk about the realm of the sacred are crucial. So that point, I think, is also important. Again, it's not that God as a big person is inherently problematic, but God as a tyrannical ruler actually is problematic because it valorizes tyrannical power. And in the book, in each chapter, I try to explore what aspects of the experiences of the divine each metaphor lifts up. So let me share, I'm gonna share a little bit from the water chapter, and then I think I'll share from one other. So if you have the book and you want to read along, I'm starting on chapter 39, the first page of the chapter called Drinking from God. The year that he turned 40, my father suffered a massive heart attack. I remember coming home from school that afternoon, I was in the 11th grade, and being told by my mother what had happened. It was a total shock. My father was young, strong, seemingly healthy. Heart attacks were things that happened on TV or in the movies, not to me or the people I loved. Thankfully, my father survived. He spent over a month in the hospital and came home a different person than the man who went in. After decades of smoking 1 to 3 packs of cigarettes a day, he became a virulent non-smoker. After years of working long hours and subsisting largely on coffee and cigarettes, he pulled way back on the work hours and watched his diet carefully. Beginning a few months after he got home from the hospital, my dad would drive out to the Calvert Cliffs in Maryland, almost an hour from our house, to walk along the beach and collect shark's teeth and other fossils. He would spend hours there, methodically searching the sand at the base of the cliffs. Wading through the water by the shore, he developed an incredible patience, able to see shark's teeth lying in the sand that to me were invisible. At around the same time, my father took up kayaking. This was the late 1970s and early 80s, before paddling became a popular leisure time activity. To learn how to navigate in whitewater, my dad took a week-long course in North Carolina. He would practice rolling his kayak at the local pool. But even though he ended up joining a boat club where Olympic kayakers trained, he wasn't trying to become competitive. He simply loved being out on the Potomac River, whether paddling through flat water or floating down the rapids. I do not think it was entirely coincidental that water-related activities became my father's de facto spiritual practice after his near-death experience. Water is a powerful force of nature, and many people are drawn to spend time by the ocean or by lakes and streams. We owe our very lives to the availability of water. Indeed, the majority of our cells are largely made up of water. In many cultures, water is a symbol of life and power. It is therefore not so surprising that water is one of the most prevalent metaphors for God in the Hebrew Bible. So I'm going to just jump ahead where I talk about some of the sort of how the Torah connects to God as water. So this is called Drinking from God. I grew up in Maryland, where access to water was never an issue. There was plenty of rain year-round and so much humidity in the summer, you could practically drink the air. Then at the age of 18, I went to spend a year in Israel, living on a kibbutz in the Negev desert. Suddenly, water was a precious resource. Rain only fell in the winter months, and in the orchards where I worked, the trees were sustained by miles of irrigation tubes. It was hot but dry in the summer, and we Americans had to be constantly reminded to drink. I remember our first hike in the desert, stopping to take a drink from my canteen. I didn't even realize until the water hit my mouth how incredibly thirsty I was. It is hard to express how deeply satisfying that canteen of lukewarm water was in that moment. That experience comes to mind as I read biblical passages where the author speaks of thirsting for God and drinking from a godly well or stream. And these are some verses from Psalms. How precious is your love, O God. Humanity is nourished from the riches of your house. You give them drink from the stream of your delight. Elohim, you are my God. I seek you. My soul thirsts for you. My flesh faints for you, as in a dry and weary land where there is no water. As the deer longs for water streams, so does my soul long for you, O God. My soul thirsts for God, for the living God. When I think of my father walking along the water's edge by the Calvert Cliffs or paddling on the Potomac, I wonder if his soul was drinking in some kind of spiritual sustenance, even as his physical self was enjoying the literal waters. I know that this metaphor of a thirsty soul resonates with me. It is an accurate description of those times when I feel spiritually dry, as if some essential source of nourishment has been cut off. In those moments, I am like that deer in the Judean desert, searching for an afik, a channel in the earth that fills when it rains. At these times, God is the source from which my thirsty soul can be quenched, if only I am willing to drink. In the words of the prophet Isaiah, I can be like that orchard in the Negev, nourished by godly waters. And here's the Isaiah. Adonai shall guide you always and satisfy your soul in drought, and you shall be like a watered garden. Let me share, I want to share one more metaphor now. I'll share a little bit later. This is from the chapter, which chapter is this? How awesome is this place? Chapter 4. So this is about the one rabbinic metaphor that I explore, which is God as makom, which means place. This is a really interesting one because we still use the name hamakom. We know if you're familiar with the traditional Jewish burial, after the burial, you say to the mourners, hamakom yenechem etchem, may the place comfort you. It's a very common rabbinic name, but we never really stopped and said, what does it mean to call God the place? That's literally what hamakom means, the place. What does it mean? And so that's sort of what I was exploring in this chapter. So if you want to follow along, I'm on page 78. So I begin with a quote from the theologians John Lennon and Paul McCartney. There are places I'll remember all my life, though some have changed, some forever, not for better. Some have gone and some remain. When I was in elementary school, I spent a lot of time in the woods near my house. Along with my dog, I would climb on rocks in the stream bed, walk along the paths, and sit under trees and make up songs. It was a fairly small woods, surrounded by houses and even some high-rise apartments. But in certain spots, and at certain seasons, I could pretend I was off in an expansive forest, far from civilization. The woods were my refuge, my creative place, a kind of second home. Thinking back, I'm somewhat amazed at how much time I could spend there. To this day, my soul feels nourished when I'm in the woods, surrounded by trees, listening to a stream when it rushes over stones. This is the power of place, whether it's the woods or a bedroom, a summer camp, or a beloved classroom. Each of us can, like the Beatles song says, conjure up places that have played a special role in our lives. I can still remember the moment and the look on his face when I took my then 11-year-old nephew to Fenway Park for the first time. Each time I visit Israel, I encounter smells and visceral sensations that take me back to my first time living there when I was 18. If I think back to all the places I've lived over the course of my life, whether for years or a few months, each functions as a memorable way station on this journey of my life. When I ask people to tell me about their God beliefs, often they have no idea what to say or simply say they don't believe in God. But if I ask them to describe a spiritual experience that they've had, whatever that means to them, many will tell me about special places in their lives. So perhaps it shouldn't be so surprising that by the early rabbinic period, the epithet hamakom, the place, had become a fairly well-known Jewish name for God. In the Mishnah, the earliest compilation of rabbinic teachings, there are instructions for prayer that include this comment. The ancient pious ones would meditate for an hour and then pray in order to direct their hearts to hamakom, the place. Another early teaching is recorded in the Talmud in a discussion of what to say to people who are ill. Quote, Rabbi Judah would say, may hamakom, the place, have compassion upon you and all who are sick. But what exactly does it mean to call God the place? What are we to make of this metaphor? For the rabbis of the Mishnah, hamakom was a name for God that implied a sense of God's nearness and love. They used the name hamakom when they were talking about seeking compassion for themselves or others, when they gave a blessing of comfort to someone who was suffering, and when talking about how people should relate to one another. What is a place? It is a physical space in which we experience ourselves in relation to that which is around us. Certain spaces make us feel contained and supported. They provide a structure within which we experience a sense of protection or refuge. Other spaces can make us feel our own smallness and give us a sense of wonder at the vastness that surrounds. A sacred place can be one especially designated for worship or meditation, a synagogue or mosque, a church or temple, or a place in nature by the ocean or on a mountaintop. But the most important thing about place is that we're always in one. The underlying irony of calling God Hamakom, the place, is that there isn't just one place to encounter godliness. That can happen in any place. Place is here in this moment, right here where we are. The metaphor of God as place invites us to open ourselves to the potential godliness of any and every moment in any place that we might find ourselves. And just one more paragraph from this chapter. To experience divinity as place is to understand the essential sacredness of the very place of our lives, this beautiful planet Earth. In this understanding, God is not something far away and other. It is right here in the ground beneath our feet. We are commanded to preserve, not destroy, the sacred place in which we find ourselves as earthly beings. At a time when we are finally awakening to the profound danger that human technological achievements have wrought on the climate, and as we realize the precariousness of life on this planet, it is time for us to have compassion on this holy place. If we love this place that we call our home, then we must stop destroying it. I think I'm going to pause there. I'm going to ask Jonathan to chime in, thoughts, reflections, questions, and then we'll open it up.
Thank you. Thank you, Toba. There we go. When I talk about metaphors in my congregation, one of the key ways I've tried to explain it to people is that it has to be poetry. It can't be didactic when we're talking about the ineffable experience. There's no way, as I say, you can't define that which is infinite. It's an oxymoron, it's an impossibility. And so I often use the term poetry. When we're praying, I say, look at this beautiful poem in the prayer book, so that we can be released from having to agree with it or disagree with it. And I was thinking about that while you were talking. In our prayer book, here's an advertisement for the Reconstructionist movement. Rabbi Mordechai Kaplan, who was the founder of this approach to Judaism, absolutely rejected the idea of God as a supernatural being, and understood God, as it turns out the Torah does, as a processor power in the universe, and came up with countless ways of describing God as the power that makes for liberation. God is the power so Kaplan tried to depersonalize God. And then when the revised edition of the Reconstructionist prayer book came out in 1994, called Kol HaNeshama, which was put together by many of our colleagues, they did a radical experiment, which was that anytime, if you all handled this prayer book probably, anytime that the Hebrew name, the ineffable name, Yod He Vav He, is in the Hebrew, in the English, the traditional English translation was to say Lord, which certainly fixes that extinct metaphor. And so in our prayer book, they came up with at least 100 different descriptions that are in small caps. So it's like not the usual, so that they're trying, and by doing so, they were trying to loosen us up, to kind of like unkink us from that fixed idea that all of us had rejected, virtually all of us had rejected. And I've always appreciated that about the prayer book. And I think Toba is taking this now and digging deep into it in a way that's just continues the effort of Reconstructionism to make Judaism relevant to our worldview. So I want to add one more thought about that, Toba, which is that Oops, guess what happened to that thought?
It'll come back.
I know.
Can I just respond to a couple things you said, though?
Then my thought will come back.
Yeah, then it'll come back. No, I totally agree that liturgy is poetry. It is poetry. That's what it is. It's trying to capture something. But metaphors aren't poetry, and I think that's really important.
Please clarify.
I would be careful because, again, I think in our culture, when we say a metaphor, we're talking about the active metaphors that Gary describes, and we assume it's literary and it's not lived experience. So I think whereas liturgy is poetry, I think this cognitive linguistic understanding of metaphor as a foundational part of our experience makes us take the metaphors, to me, a little more seriously. It is poetry, and when it says in the Psalms, sing to the rock, I think our ancestors were singing to rocks. I don't think that's poetry. I think they had practices because they were deeply connected to the earth, and they would go out and hang out with rocks. And that's what I made my people in my class do. Let's go hang out with rocks. What's the rock have? I'm not trying to personalize the rock. It's a rock. But what happens when I hung out with rock? What happens when I really pay attention to water? I mean, on the East Coast, and I think, we take water so for granted. That's why I talk about being in Israel for the first time in the water chapter, because all of a sudden I was somewhere where oh my God, you can't take water for granted. Of course, in a culture like that, in a setting like that, water is going to be one of your main metaphors for the divine, because it's the life force. So I think liturgy is poetry, yes, and metaphors are not poetry, the kind of metaphors I'm talking about. And I think, and that's why, so each chapter has practices at the end of the chapter to try to re-engage with the metaphor and sort of, and that's maybe this, I didn't come up with the title God is Here, but in the end, it's a good title, because I think it's it's right here in our experience, and we have to be able to touch it. And I think, and where I disagree, and I everything you said about Kaplan and the prayer book is true. Where I diverge from Kaplan is Kaplan was a classic early 20th century American, we are on a march of progress and we are more sophisticated and we understand God better than the primitives. I'll come back to your question, Judith. And so again, he got more and more abstract. And I actually think, and I got this very much from a fabulous book. I quoted in the book, but I would highly recommend it. James Kugel's The God of Old. He's a fabulous biblical scholar. He tries to get to the oldest strands of the Torah and the Bible. The ancients, the sacred was right there. God was right there. The line between this world and that world was very thin. I think they had experiences of the divine that we can barely imagine. And I sort of want, I want some of that, So I'm looking to what they wrote to say, how did they experience that? And I don't think it's dissimilar from how other indigenous peoples experience the divine. We just have been separated from the land and from that tradition for a very, very long time. Certainly by the rabbinic period. So I don't want to spend too much time on liturgy, but I think what helps me with liturgy, and maybe partly is to rewrite some liturgy and use some of these metaphors in it. I wish there were more non-human metaphors in our prayer book. I agree with what you said, Jonathan, and there's a lot of those metaphors are human. Unfortunately, I wish they would have included more of the non-human. When we approach a poem, we don't say, do I believe this or not? We say, where's it trying to take me? So I think that's how the liturgy works for me. And to be honest, it works better in Hebrew than translation. So that's with that caveat, I can understand the Hebrew. But, when I read in the morning blessings, the morning prayers, the one who makes new each and every day the work of creation, that's not a scientific statement. It's an invitation to experience the world that way. So that's how I approach the liturgy. And I want to do more work. I'm hoping to do more work this year with my congregation and congregants who are here hold me to this. How could some of these metaphors come into our liturgy? That's something I want to think about, because I haven't done that work yet.
Beautiful.
So yeah, let's open it up. Maybe.
Oh no, I wanted to say a couple more things. And
please.
There's still plenty.
We got a lot of time. Good, go for it.
The thought that flew through is, you exactly referred to it over and over again, which is that in the Reconstructionist Haggadah, Richard Hirsch, our colleague, writes in the introduction that what Judaism bequeaths to us is not a specific concept of God, but the need for a relationship with the divine. And the only way to have a relationship is to have an experience, as opposed to a concept, which is a discussion, And so I'm completely with you in terms of the idea. The whole purpose is to have this experience so that we are in relationship to the world. You have this beautiful quote from, Barbara King, anthropologist, who says, the religious imagination thrives on the human, here it is. I believe that the desire for emotional connection with the sacred is fundamental to our species. The religious imagination thrives on the human yearning to enter into emotional experience with some force vaster than ourselves. And again, you use the word experience over and over, and I'm completely with you. And of course, the current word of embodiment, because that's where we experience things. And to disconnect from our body is to disconnect from our experience, which is to make us essentially impoverished in our relationship with, and you can, so I loved that quote and I appreciated it. I've been teaching a book that Matan Margalit turned me on to a few years ago, an agrarian reading of the Bible by Ellen Davis. Have you read that book? It's really excellent, which I forget what that, but an agrarian reading of the Bible is the subtitle. We've been talking about it for weeks in class. It'll come back to me. And she uses Wendell Berry as and the framework of agrarian thinking to talk about, to understand the Torah of a land-based people who were intimate with the water, the place, the light, the fire, the cloud, like intimate with them, which are all the metaphors you explore in the book. And it's been very illuminating for me to read Torah through her. All of us here who are interested in Torah, it's always so exciting when somebody opens another window into getting close. Scripture, culture, and agriculture.
Well, thank you. I didn't know that. I've never heard of it. Thank you.
I think you'll enjoy it.
Yeah.
So do you want to say anything about what I just said?
Nope, let's open it up.
One more thing I wanted to point out, then I'm ready to open it up. In the metaphors you use, and you do this quite intentionally and quite beautifully, water as an ancient metaphor that connects us to the experience of the divine. Fire, ancient metaphor.
Rock.
Cloud, the cloud. So let me just take, and of course, rock. So let me just take those. One of the things you do that I really appreciate is that water can be nourishing and it can drown us. Fire can warm us and it can burn us to death. A cloud can shade us or it can completely engulf us and terrify us. And so the beauty of those metaphors for me is that, first of all, none of them are, you can't hold on to them, right? They're here, but they're not here. They're present, but you can't put them in a bottle and keep it, But also, and I'd like you to say something more about this, or just your reflections on it, how an authentic experience of the divine is all of it. We can be nourished, but also overwhelmed. We can. I thought that was beautiful, and I just wanted to tell you that.
You. I appreciate it. Yeah, I think maybe I'll read. Let me respond, read a little bit, and then I think this is really important. I'm really glad you lifted it up because I think, look, this is where the God is big person completely falls down, right? Reality is complicated and scary, and so our God metaphors need to have that multivalence that you're talking about. When it's a big person, it's really problematic. The God who loves and the God who punishes, like the God who gives life and the God who kills, like that's really hard for people, and then we get all these like debates of theologians, how do bad things happen to good people? And they're the wrong question, because when it comes to water, right, no one gets mad at water when we get drowned. I mean, we might get scared, we might not like it, but we don't take offense. We understand that fire is dangerous and we have to be careful and is completely necessary. So let me read a little bit let me read from the last chapter, which is some modern metaphors, but I think it captures this sense. And then I'd love to hear other folks' questions. So this is God as electricity. This is the metaphor of electricity, which I first heard from Rabbi Ira Eisenstein. I should give kudos, Mordecai Kaplan's son-in-law. A few years into my rabbinate, I was probably on this retreat with you, Jonathan. I was IJS. I was on a retreat with about 30 other rabbis from across the Jewish denominations. On the opening night, we did a get to know you exercise in which we had a series of 3-minute conversations with one another, each with a different prompt. As I moved around the circle of colleagues, I prepared to answer the question, if you hadn't become a rabbi and money or ability or prerequisite knowledge were not an issue, what would you have been? I was pretty sure I was going to say I'd have been a community organizer. I had worked in a variety of progressive organizations before going to rabbinical school, and I identified as a social justice activist. So imagine my surprise when it was my turn to answer the question, and what came out of my mouth was, I would have been a physicist. The reason I found this completely surprising is that I am terrible at math and never got anywhere near a physics class in my high school or college years. There is no one less likely to have become a physicist than I. But after I gave my answer, I realized that I do share something with those who are blessed to do physics, a sense of wonder at the universe, and a deep desire to understand how things work. As a rabbi, I get to engage in big questions, and I seek to discern some kind of meaningful order in what often feels like a disordered, chaotic world. I want to know what makes us tick and what the larger context is for human existence. When I read the Hebrew Bible, I imagine that its authors were sort of like me and sort of like modern physicists, seeking answers to how the cosmos works and what our place in it is. Their experience of the divine was part of that exploration, in fact, was inseparable from it. Science offers metaphors that help me understand some of the more challenging aspects of the biblical portrayal of God. Among the most difficult stories in the Bible are those in which seemingly unsuspecting characters get zapped by God. A good example is the story of Nadav and Avihu, which I talk about in an earlier chapter. Aaron's oldest sons make an unauthorized offering at the altar and are immediately consumed by the divine fire. Something similar happens in the book of Samuel, when King David attempts to bring the Ark of the Covenant, a golden box holding the stone tablets that Moses received on Sinai, to his capital city of Jerusalem. The Ark is being transported on an ox cart, and when the oxen stumble, one of the men guiding the cart, a guy named Uzzah, reaches out to steady the Ark. When he touches it, God is incensed and strikes him down, and Uzzah dies. This story seems even worse than the episode with Nadav and Avihu. They at least could be accused of making a dubious offering in an irresponsible way. All that poor Uzzah did was try to keep the Holy Ark from falling out of a cart. Why in the world would God strike him down? Earlier in the Bible, the Israelites are warned that only the tribe of the Levites are authorized to transport the various items of the Mishkan, the Holy Tabernacle. And the men responsible for transporting the Ark, via a set of poles fastened to rings on its sides, have to be extremely careful not to actually touch it or they will die. When God strikes Uzzah in the story of the ox cart, it seems to be the unavoidable consequence of someone touching a holy object that is profoundly dangerous to humans. The best that I can understand how the ancient Israelites understood this holy danger is through the metaphor of electricity. The Holy of Holies at the center of the Mishkan housed the Ark, which functions something like the core of a nuclear reactor, supplying the sacred energy that was then channeled by the priests through their rituals. Just as enormous precautions have to be taken to safely make use of nuclear energy, so too did those who interacted with the Mishkan and the Ark at its center have to take extreme care not to get zapped. When the book of Samuel describes God being incensed when Uzzah touches the Ark, we can understand it less as the emotion of anger and more like a natural physical reaction. It's akin to me being able to safely use the electric power that is supplied to my home as long as it is wired and grounded properly. I need to avoid sticking my finger in a socket. Hapless Uzzah had the best of intentions, but by touching the Ark, he did the biblical equivalent of holding up a metal rod in a lightning storm and got a shock that took his life. The question remains, why did the authors of the Bible perceive godly power to be so inherently dangerous? And I think this gets to what we're talking about, Jonathan. What truth were they trying to convey in these metaphors of fire and electricity and the stories of zapping that happens to people both innocent and guilty? My answer is that the biblical authors were acknowledging a simple reality. To be alive is pretty damn scary. We exist in a universe that is largely, even today, beyond our understanding. We are often at the mercy of forces we cannot control. The ancients were very honest about God, and the Bible is not a Hallmark greeting card. It is a wholly, sometimes contradictory muddle of beauty and horror, love and pain, hope and hopelessness, a lot like life. And somehow, and somewhere within and behind all of this complexity is Yod He Vav He, the source of life itself. As the prophet Isaiah audaciously declared, forming light and creating darkness, making peace and creating destruction, I, Yod He Vav He, do all these things. There is only one power source of the universe, the prophet teaches. It manifests in that which we find pleasant and in that which scares us. It both sustains us and makes us mortal. And just as with electrical current, if we don't properly channel that divine power, we can generate some severe shocks. As the world witnessed in Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945, when human beings start playing with the primal energies of the universe, we take on godlike powers of both creation and destruction. Perhaps the Bible was right in warning us that there are some things that we humans should just not touch. So,
thank you very much.
yeah.
Thank you. So my friends, here's what we'll do now. We have plenty of time, and I'm going to invite you, anyone who wants to engage with Rabbi Toba. You can do it in two ways. You can raise your virtual hand, in which case I'll see it and I'll be able to recognize you in order, or you can type things into the chat, which I'll be happy to read aloud to Rabbi Toba. So if anyone has a comment or a question, Judy Kerman raised her hand. Judy, you're on.
Well, I want to ask that question that I asked.
About the liturgy?
Yeah, if the metaphors work and the liturgy doesn't, it sounds like you're working on liturgy.
Not yet. But I think it's a project to do. I think some of the, I don't know. I think there is some beautiful liturgy. I think some of these metaphors are in the liturgy. God is called rock in the liturgy.
Yeah, I want to be in your face a little bit. I love the book, but I felt like it was an apologia for the word God. Like you were trying to convince us it was usable. I don't think it's usable, even though I think your metaphors are provocative and sometimes right on the money. I don't think the word is usable, and I think the liturgy needs a major root and branch, if you'll pardon the metaphor, reworking. For people like me to find it usable at all.
I think, Judy, I'd say two things. One, I think I say pretty early in the book, I am not wedded to the English word God. You can dispose of it. I think the gift to us as Jews is that we have the real name of God is not God. The real name of God is Yod He Vav He, which is not pronounceable, which is not sayable, which maybe is related to breath, maybe is related to becoming. So the gift of our liturgy doesn't actually say God. Our liturgy says Yod He Vav He. And again, I don't know if you're relating to the liturgy in Hebrew or English, so that it may be, but if you're in the Hebrew, if you're in the Hebrew, every single time Yod He Vav He comes up. So one little thing I've done, and I do this at High Holidays, choose, there's all those names, right? There's all those names of the divine in the book. Choose a couple that you like. When it comes to the Shema, I'll give you a couple liturgy things. Shema Yisrael, don't say Adonai. Say Makor Mayim Chaim, say Tzur, say Makom, say whatever, or a name from your heart. Say a verb, creating, loving. Say that name. Loving, Eloheinu, rock, is one. However you want to do it. But so that's one way. It's just every single, it's the invitation that our prayer book makes, but every single time Yod He Vav He comes up, or those little all caps metaphors come up. The other way to do it is to during services, I'll give you an example. I didn't come up with this. Someone who I don't know, she came to this first class I taught. I never came back, and I don't even remember her name, but she had your problem.
Elijah.
Yeah, it was Elijah. So she came into my class, and we were studying Makom, God is Makom. And she came to class, and I sent people off to do something around place, and really connecting to place and makom. And she came in the next week and related this to me so she went to a different shul. She says, we always get to the Shema. She says, and I can't say it. Really, I was having your problem. Like, the liturgy doesn't work. I don't believe it. I get the Shema. God is one. What is that? Well, she said, but what I did was leading up to the Shema, she said, I relate very strongly to physical places. She said, I just thought of those places as I was, just listening to the music and getting the Shema. And then I said the Shema, and when I said Echad, I just brought all those places together. And she said, I had an experience I'd never had before. And I was so moved that she figured it out. She took the metaphor and made it work for her. So that's, I think, the invitation, is the metaphors are real. The experience is real. I'm completely not wedded to the word God. I mean, it's what we have in English, so we have it. If I was writing this in Hebrew, I would just use Yod Heh Vav Heh all the time. But
what would you say? Would you say Adonai?
No, there's like 5,000 God names in here. Choose the ones you like. Choose the one you like. There's so many. Rachamana, Shechina, Makom, Makor Mayim Chaim. I mean, but I think, and do the practices. I think it's really, and then I'll take another question, but we have to do the practice. This is not, I want to really echo what Rabbi Jonathan, this is not an intellectual exercise. I really am trying to, create new experiences. So if the traditional liturgy isn't working, don't use it. But there are prayer practices I have in here using the names, and I invite you, play with it's really to play and do it in a spirit of play. I'm not trying to get anyone to believe anything. I'm not trying to convince anyone of anything. I'm just trying to open some doors that I think have been locked for people, unfortunately. So that's the attempt of the book. So I appreciate your engaging.
Thank you for that answer, Toba. I'm going to add that when I get to Yod Heh Vav Heh, Baruch Atah, sometimes I just breathe, and I don't name it at all.
Yeah.
So I put it in my body.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you, Judy. Anyone else? Questions, comments? Abigail says Havaya means the experience, existence.
And I'll just say that we don't choose the name that works for us. I was texting with a colleague who's Black, and I texted him right after Buffalo, just checking in. How are you doing? And he just was having a hard time. And I knew he had my book. I said, go to the chapter on fire. And there's a name of God there, El Kana, which is the furnace remelting God, the God of fire that melts down. And he said he's going to try to pray to that God. He needs a God that really is fiery and stands up to injustice. So in that moment, that was the name that was speaking to him, was El Kana. But maybe at another moment, it's a gentler name. Where are we in our lives? Where are we in this moment? Which aspect of the divine do we need to connect to?
Play. That word's crucial.
Yeah.
Melissa, nice to have you here. Do you want to turn your camera on?
Oh, I thought,
That means you have two devices on at the same time in the same room that give each other feedback. Okay.
Try again, Melissa. Yeah, try it again.
Come back if you want to, Melissa.
Melissa, maybe write it in the chat. For some reason, the audio is not working. Maybe write your question in the chat if you're able.
Good idea. Leah, are you raising your hand? Okay, Leah Taub, and then Teresa.
Oh, Teresa's here. Hey, cool.
Yeah, Leah, go ahead.
Well, I've asked this question many times, but when we're praying, who exactly are we praying to? A metaphor of force? I mean, what does everybody have something different in their minds that they're praying to? The air, the mountain, the rock?
Good question. I don't know, prayer is a practice, and I understand practice is working on us. The rabbinic tradition says over and over, God really has no use for our prayers. It's not for God, it's for us. So I would shift it around, Leah, and maybe say, different experiences of prayer in Jewish tradition are meant to foster different mind states in us. So most of our liturgy is about fostering a mind state of gratitude and praise. So then I would say use the metaphors that help you with that. What are the metaphors that really or use language that really helps you feel grateful for being alive, grateful for this created world. I mean, so much of our liturgy is about that. the only prayer that's sort of directional is the prayer, the prayers when we ask for things in the weekday Amidah. And I always feel like just send it out into the universe. I never quite know where I'm sending it to, but it's important just to put it out there, just to let the world know, let myself know. But the last thing I'll say is that the Mishnah quote I read earlier, I love that quote from the Mishnah that says, it's so beautiful, where it says that the pious ancient ones for an hour before prayer would direct their hearts towards Hamakom, the place, and they do not define what the place is. So I think that's mysterious. Is it like literally were they facing Jerusalem? Was it God, or was it this place, like right here? Because Hamakom, the place, is also a cognate for the compassionate one. So maybe it was their own hearts. So I don't think our tradition, we have to know exactly where the prayer is going. I think it's more, and in the there's a chapter on voice, that sometimes when we pray, we're just aligning ourselves with like the sounds of the universe. We're just aligning ourselves with the vibrations of the universe. So those are many answers to one question. Take it the way you want. But I guess I'm trying to say is, effective prayer doesn't necessarily mean we think there's anyone or anything listening. That's what I want to say. And if we do believe that, that's beautiful. But if we don't, I think it's okay. The prayer can still be quite powerful. Teresa, a Dorshei folk person who I haven't seen in a while. Where are you?
I'm right here.
Hey, good to see you.
This is a wonderful talk. So the idea of God as a concept, an entity, is problematic on so many levels. And for me, for a long time, led to complete separation from any kind of spiritual practice. And then, as you know, Dorshei has been part of my life. And a lot of meditation has become part of my life. And so in that practice, I moved towards breath as the basically breath and divinity, the quality of divinity rather than something more concrete. So I think that when I, am meditating and praying, may all beings be happy, may all beings be safe from harm and free from suffering. It's an intention that I kind of put into the world with the belief that we're all connected. There's an inner divinity that connects us. And if we hold that intention, that we influence that the world that we're in. So
it's beautiful.
I needed to go there because I could not deal with the patriarchal, source of, and the stories, they're like, I couldn't believe the story of Adam and Eve. I had so many problems with that story, So I had to find a way to engage with the things that I find in the Bible, in the Torah, that I find beautiful. And Toba, honestly, the way that you have taught our congregation to engage with the liturgy, to see it really in a way as metaphor, as an opportunity to look at the experiences of another time and other people and to bring them forward, has been really instrumental in my finding peace with divinity. So.
Wow, thank you. You want to do a blurb on the back of the book? Everything you said is so gorgeous on so many levels. And and a lot of those practices you mentioned are in the books. I think, I bring in Buddhist practices and things because it's, again, I really want to come back to what Jonathan said. It's about the experience. It's not about a concept. It really is about the experience, and the metaphors are a way to get at experiences, because experiences are specific. They're not random, and they're not abstract, right? You can't have it's impossible to have an abstract experience, right? You can only have your experience in your body in this moment with your, with your breath. But the other thing I wanted to, there's something else that you said that made me think of this. I'm also having a little flighty brain thing. You were talking about, there's actually a beautiful metaphor that, a meditation I learned from someone else. It's in the book around breath, which is finding the letters of Yud Hey Vav Hey in the breath, that like the moment before the in breath is the Yud, and then the lungs expanding is the first Hey, and then the upright back or as upright as we get, when we take the in breath is the Vav, and then the exhale, and you can literally breathe Yud Hey Vav Hey, in the meditation. It's quite
Beautiful.
It's quite beautiful. But yeah, I think we've been just bogged down in concepts for really no reason. I mean, I really see like the last 2,000 years of theological debates is pretty much useless. Like, I don't even know what they're about. It's like, while other people were going off and trying to like have experiences of the sacred, some folks were sitting around. I know what I was going to say. And the other thing in terms of like Torah stories and even the liturgy, it's a modern curse that we read things literally. The ancients couldn't read literally. They didn't have the capacity. It wasn't invented yet. They thought mythically, so when I read Adam and Eve, I'm reading like, what's the story about and what are they trying? And this is what you were saying. I try to bring it to you all, but right. The people who wrote this, they thought so differently than I did. And the whole idea of like literal didn't exist. So how do we enter? It's very hard for us as moderns to enter into mythic thinking. It's very hard. Kids can do it. That's why the little guys have no problem, because they can shift, between the mythic and the literal, but we are really sort of cursed. So I think we're constantly fighting our own tendency to hyper literalize everything. Mm-hmm. I don't think ever the intention. And so that is that we have to constantly reckon with that. And what we have, which is this 2,000 years of Midrash, which helps us do that. But, otherwise we're stuck with stories that feel sort of either feel patriarchal or ridiculous or unbelievable or something, because we don't really know I think we don't know how to read them exactly.
And I think we're challenged by communities that do take liturgy.
Yes, exactly, and that's and it's
so
right, and who think God spoke English, that's and don't know the richness of the Hebrew, unfortunately. Thank you so much, Teresa. That was beautiful. I know there's a few more folks. Who else?
Well, yeah, Toba, let me just read some things that people put in the chat, and then I'll recognize Nancy and Gail. And I have a thought, which is maybe before we run out of time, maybe there is an exercise in the book that you just want to have us experience for an example, since that's so much of the meat of your book is not just the beautiful and the way you enter us into metaphors, but then the ways you could practice with a metaphor. Does that sound like a good idea?
Yeah, but I'd love to do this chant with you all, so we can do it whenever. Yeah.
Okay, good. So let me read the beautiful things that have come in the chat. So Melissa, who was having trouble with her sound, said, I love the part in your book of Hine Makom Iti. Here is a place with me. This week I used the words on page 90. I added a few more things to that: strength, confidence. Then I did send that out to my son. I felt so connected with Yod He Vav He. I felt connected.
That's that's exactly the practice that Teresa was just talking about. That's so beautiful. Thank you for bringing that, Melissa. That's beautiful.
Yeah. And then Lori Mosine says, I think of who we are praying to is the collective energy that we are all part of and that breathes into us. Beautiful, Lori. And Stacy Brooks says, for me, praying is a practice of mining myself for the place from which I can experience a higher state of presence and openness and peace. Beautiful.
It's gorgeous, yeah.
And Judy, who spoke before, said, the issue with liturgy is the social/public. I see how to use your metaphors in personal practice, although I don't do much of that. How does my Jewish community make that more accessible? Even Recon liturgy makes it less accessible.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think, Judy, that to me, the parts of our prayer book that come closest are Sheila Weinberg's versions of the prayers, to be honest. I think I personally would prefer a prayer book full of Sheila's writing as the translation, but you're right. We have work to do, I think, in translating this. I don't disagree at all.
Thank you. And Betty says,
Marcia Falk, also, yes.
And of course, Judy adds Marcia Falk, who's written entire prayer books.
Sure, beautiful.
In new language and new metaphors.
Oh yeah, beautiful stuff.
Betty says, thanks. I love to hear the author read their own writing. This comforts me in that maybe I have not failed. It somewhat answers the question, why do I travel so far sometimes for services only to have my mind wander off the page to places and God/person experiences? That means you're succeeding. That's right, Betty.
Excellent.
Nancy Berlin and then Gail Albert. Go ahead, Nancy.
Well, first of all, my favorite out of all the chapters was the one about God as a voice. And when Rabbi Jonathan, and it was an aha moment for me when he was talking about Mount Sinai, when Moses was giving the 10 Commandments, when he was at Mount Sinai, and he said everybody was included. You know, everybody. And what I was thinking about with the voice was that we have that voice now when I think of meditation, because I never thought of it in terms, I've done meditation, even Jewish meditation, but I never thought of it as that voice that you said that everybody heard as much as they could hear. But we all have it inside us. So meditation is, what I'm thinking about it, is hearing the voice of Mount Sinai, what we need to hear from Mount Sinai. So thank you. That was, I mean, the whole thing was really powerful.
Beautiful. Thank you. That's beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nancy. Gail Albert?
I loved your book. So this may not be relevant, but I thought you might like to know about it. There's a brilliant I don't know what to call, neurophysiologist, I guess. He's one of the current world leaders in trying to understand and doing research in how the brain actually works and how consciousness develops. And his major point, and his most recent book is the easiest one to read, called Feeling and Knowing. And his point is that, and he traces it step by step, the development of consciousness is profoundly dependent upon and embedded in physical bodily experience. Okay. And he's very clear, you can't have AI without bodily experience. So that actually would be real, you know, actual consciousness.
Right.
And so I was thinking in terms of the metaphors that are so visceral. Okay. And the Hebrew, the Torah is visceral when you read it in Hebrew. Yeah. That's the power of it. So when you're talking about the metaphors being embedded in physical experiences, I just wanted to say this too, because I thought it's such an interesting, so as long as we're talking concept, God isn't real. Right. But when we're talking metaphor that's embedded in actual physical experience, something becomes real. That's what I wanted to say.
I appreciate that. Thank you. It's beautiful. Yeah, yeah. We're embodied creatures. We're carbon-based life forms. You know, we're not little heads in a tank. This is really important. And I think, you know, in the West, we're coming back to other parts of the world. Never forgot that. In our part of the world, we forgot that. And
so his name is Damasio, Antonio Damasio.
Damasio, thank you.
Damasio. And the other thing I wanted to say or ask you about is, I know, Jonathan, you've been talking so much about the Davis book, and I mean to get it. Okay. But it also seems to me that so much of what they're writing comes from what we think is the perhaps mythical, but seems very real when I listen to the metaphors, journey through the desert. You know, I mean, I've been in desert enough, in Utah desert, to know that rock and air and cloud and fire and stone and water have a very particular kind of quality and meaning that are different from when you're forming.
Yes, I think, I don't know if it's the journey through the desert. I mean, we don't know if the journey through the desert ever happened, but yeah, but certainly just living in, I mean, the people who
not agricultural, just being in desert.
I mean, it shapes, right. It shapes everything, you know, there, right. I mean, you know, different cultures produce different metaphors depending, right, on their lived experience. So yeah, I think the desert experience is clearly part of it. And yeah, and, you know, that's why I reference in a few places just, you know, the land of Israel, because until, you know, that landscape shaped those texts. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gail. Toba, what would you like to do now? We have a few more minutes.
Let's do the chant and then we'll sit for a minute. And then if people want to have any final thoughts or questions. So yeah, I thought I would do a chant with you. So my guess is Rabbi Jonathan has brought some of Shefa Gold's chants to Woodstock Jewish congregation. I've certainly brought some to Dorshei Tzedek. So I had a wonderful experience. Yeah,
I sang backup for her on some of her early CDs.
There you go. All right, you're better. You're a higher level.
They weren't CDs; they were cassette.
They were cassettes. So I had this wonderful experience a number of years ago. We were at a Reconstructionist Rabbinical Association convention. I actually wasn't supposed to be teaching. Someone got sick and couldn't teach, and someone said, "Would I take this person's place?" So luckily, I had some of my metaphor stuff online, and I downloaded it, and I taught a session about the God and metaphor stuff. And Shefa was actually in the class with me, and then right after that was Shefa had a had a workshop doing her chants, and I realized, right, that's what Shefa's doing. She's bringing the metaphors to life in her chants. That's exactly what her chants do. And that's why she calls them practices now. She doesn't even call them chants. It's like, it's a practice to like say, to find a line, and then she just makes it real. She makes you like the metaphor live. So the chant I want to do with you is actually a chant I did with her that day. And it's one of the verses I referenced in what I read from the water chapter. So let me share my screen. So this is Psalm 42:2. Let me just put this down a little bit. So it's in English and Hebrew. If the word God in the English doesn't work for you, just breathe. Please don't, if it's a problem for you, really, I mean it. I know that word is so problematic. Don't say it, but it's there. So it's the Hebrew is the end of this verse. Just as the deer longs for water by the riverbank, so does my soul long for you, O God. So I'm going to chant this. I'm going to invite you to chant it. It doesn't really work unless it's not for listening. It's for chanting it, and it doesn't matter if you think you can't sing. Do it for a few minutes and just really take in this image. And then we're going to sit in the silence and just see what arises. In the silence after the chant. So we're going to do this now. So get comfortable. If you want to look at the words, once you feel like you know them, if you're comfortable closing your eyes, you can do that. It goes like this. Just as the deer longs for water by the riverbank, so does my soul long for you, O God. Just as the deer longs for water by the riverbank, so does my soul long for you, O God. Ke nafshi tarog elecha Elohim. Ke nafshi tarog elecha Elohim. Just as the deer longs for water by the riverbank, so does my soul long for you, O God. Just as the deer longs for water by the riverbank, so does my soul long for you, O God. Ke nafshi tarog elecha Elohim. Ke nafshi tarog elecha Elohim. Just as the deer longs for water by the riverbank, so does my soul long for you, O God. Just as the deer longs for water by the riverbank, so does my soul long for you, O God. Ke nafshi tarog elecha Elohim. Ke nafshi tarog elecha Elohim. Just as the deer longs for water by the riverbank, so does my soul long for you, O Yah. Just as the deer longs for water by the riverbank, so does my soul long for you, O God. Nafshi tarog elecha Elohim. Nafshi tarog elecha Elohim. One last time. Just as the deer longs for water by the riverbank, so does my soul long for you, O God. Just as the deer longs for water by the riverbank, so does my soul long for you, O God. Nafshi tarog elecha Elohim. Nafshi tarog elecha Elohim. Just sit for a moment, any images that arise for you. What does your soul thirst for? Where do you experience the godly water, maybe right in your body? Just sit. I think I'm inclined actually to maybe leave things there. I really appreciate everyone showing up. I loved all the questions, really, all of them. I appreciate hearing when the book is meaningful. This is a project of about 10 years, and I feel very strongly that that this book needed to be in the world. I for some reason was chosen to have it come through me. It's doing good things in the world. So I'm really pleased, and I really appreciate the Woodstock Jewish Congregation for hosting me and for folks coming.
Thank you. It's your book's doing good things in the world, and so are you.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Yeah.
Great to see everybody. Great to see old friends as well as new folks and Dorshei folks.
Thanks to everyone for coming. Thank you, Rabbi Toba. Look forward to seeing you in person before too long.
Hopefully, yes. Thank you, Deborah. Thank you.
People are putting nice things in the chat.
I'm looking, yes, I'll stay on for a few minutes. So I can
Okay. All right. Bye, Louise.
Good night, everybody.
Bye, Leah. Bye, Gail. Bye, Deborah. Bye, Pat. Thank you. Bye, Judy.
Hey, Jill.
Bye, Abigail. Chuck, it's great to see you. Hope you're well. Rabbi Ellen, thank you.
Let's see what else I know here. Hey, Jill. Jill's known me since I was a kid.
No
Bill
kidding.
Greenberg, yes, who's here. Yeah, she's known me the longest of the people here.
That's sweet.
Yeah.
My dad-
There she is. Hey, Jill, good to see you.
My dad was a pediatrician, and I still meet people who said, "Oh, your dad was my doctor." It's awfully nice.
Cool. Jill, how did you hear about this?
From my cousin Abby, who's in your congregation.
Oh, right. Of course. Yeah, that's so sweet.
Yes.
That's why I sent it out to the congregation. That's great.
And I haven't seen the book yet, but Abby, because Abby bought one for us that she's waiting to get you to inscribe it for us.
It's
Yeah.
very
We're not
pretty. I
allowed
like
to
the
buy it
jacket.
ourselves.
Okay. Well, tell her to get over there already so I can sign it. Yes.
Okay, so we follow you with her, and it's so wonderful for us to have you as the second. This is the second generation that you
Yes.
are.
So
You were
Jill was
there.
part of a community that my mom helped start with Art Waskow, the Cheder, the Verbringen Cheder, and then Jill's
Wait,
family.
you were in Washington when he started the Verbringen Cheder?
Yeah,
I was the first
she
bat
was
mitzvah.
our first graduate.
I was the first bat mitzvah of the Verbringen
She
Cheder.
was the first.
Oh, I
bat
thought I
mitzvah
said
of
you
our
were a
Cheder.
kid, but you were a kid.
I was a kid. Yeah.
She was.
Wow,
Yeah. No, it's the first bat mitzvah at Verbringen. Yeah.
that's cool.
It is cool. I know.
And that's what's so wonderful to see you now. And of course,
Who would have thunk it, Joe, right? Who would have
I recorded some of it because you may not know that our son Josh now lives in Israel.
Yes, I did know that, I think.
Oh, yeah. So I recorded some of tonight to send to him.
Cool. Or he can come to the
We'll
the
post,
website.
we'll
It'll
post
be
it
there.
on the
Yeah.
website. Karen, thank you.
Problem
so
is the
much for
time
listening.
difference, the 7 hours.
No, I'm saying, but the recording will be on the Woodstock Jewish Congregation website, so you could.
Oh, it will be. Okay,
Yeah.
that's
And we'll
great.
have it on YouTube as well. Yeah.
YouTube as well. Okay.
Super.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. This is lovely, really lovely.
Thank you.
so much.
Jonathan, it was nice to meet you for the first time. Thank
Oh,
you.
you too, Jill. Thank you. All right. Okay.
Good
Goodbye.
night.
Good night,
Good night,
everybody.
Take care, everybody. Good night.
Bye.